The first thing Elias Carter noticed was the silence. Not the comforting kind. Not the low hum of machinery that told you everything was working the way it should. This silence felt deliberate, curated, as if the room itself had decided not to speak unless absolutely necessary. Elias lay still on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling panels above him. Smooth, dark, faintly illuminated with soft blue lines that pulsed like a slow, artificial heartbeat. He didn't remember lying down. He didn't remember being escorted here. The last clear memory he had was the docking ring of Echelon Station and a security officer telling him, "Please follow us, Mr. Carter. The commander wishes to speak with you." Commander. That word carried weight on alien stations. He pushed himself up on his elbows. The bed was too soft, intentionally so, designed for comfort rather than restraint. A choice that felt calculated. If he were a prisoner, they would have restrained him. If he were a guest, this felt excessive. The room smelled faintly of something floral and unfamiliar, not unpleasant, just alien enough to keep his senses alert. Then he felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. Elias turned his head slowly. She was lying on the opposite side of the bed, close, much closer than protocol or common sense would ever allow. She wasn't touching him, but her presence filled the space between them like gravity. Long platinum silver hair spilled across dark bedding, catching the blue light in soft strands. Her eyes, unnaturally vivid, an impossible shade of crystalline blue, were fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. She didn't look surprised that he was awake. If anything, she looked patient. "You're finally conscious," she said. Her voice was low, smooth, with an accent that wrapped around the words instead of breaking them apart. Not threatening, not warm either. Controlled. Elias sat up fully now, instinctively pulling the sheet higher around his waist. He was still wearing his station-issued clothes good. That meant nothing physical had happened, or at least nothing he couldn't account for. "Where am I?" he asked. Her lips curved slightly, not a smile, more like acknowledgement. "My private quarters," she replied. "Before you panic, you were not brought here without authorization. You collapsed in the corridor outside the diplomatic wing. Your neural scans showed acute cognitive overload." That didn't help him relax. "You could have sent me to medical." "I could have," she agreed, "but that would have attracted attention." She shifted then, propping herself up on one elbow. The movement was unhurried, fluid, and disturbingly graceful. The black material she wore, some kind of fitted, high-collared garment, caught the light like polished obsidian. It wasn't armor, but it wasn't casual either. Something in between, something personal. "Attention," she continued, "is precisely what we must avoid right now." Elias studied her carefully. Tall, slender, not human, but close enough that his brain kept trying to categorize her as one. The subtle differences were what unsettled him most. The symmetry of her features too perfect, the way her gaze never wavered as if blinking were optional. "And who exactly is we?" he asked. For the first time her expression shifted. Something flickered behind her eyes. "I am Eve," she said. "Designation, Alien Liaison Command, Black Tier Clearance." Black Tier. Elias felt his stomach drop. That clearance level didn't officially exist. "And you," she added softly, "are the human analyst who uncovered a pattern you were never supposed to see." Silence returned thicker this time. Elias swallowed. "If this is about the report I submitted, I followed every protocol. I flagged it as preliminary. I didn't distribute." "You saw it anyway," Eve interrupted. Her gaze sharpened, not angry but piercing. "You recognize the discrepancy in our behavioral models, the gap between what we show humanity and what we actually are." Elias hesitated. Honesty felt dangerous, but lying felt pointless. "Yes," he said finally, "your emotional response suppression rates don't match your neurological signatures. Someone or something is regulating them, actively." Her eyes never left his. "That realization," she said quietly, "is why you are here." She shifted closer, not touching him, not yet, but close enough that he could feel the heat of her body through the thin barrier of air between them. Humans are not supposed to notice, Eve continued. You are not supposed to notice. Then why am I still alive? Elias asked. A beat, then finally a real smile, slow, intimate, dangerous. Because, Eve said, you didn't react with fear. She tilted her head slightly, studying him the way one might examine something fragile and valuable at the same time. You reacted with concern. Elias felt his pulse quicken, though he couldn't have said why. And that, she whispered, makes you very interesting to us. The lights in the room dimmed another fraction. Elias realized, too late, that collapsing in that corridor hadn't been an accident, and waking up beside her wasn't either. Elias didn't move, not because he was frozen with fear, though fear was certainly present, but because every instinct he had was telling him that sudden motion would be interpreted as something he didn't intend. Threat, panic, disrespect. On a station where power hierarchies were measured in clearances that officially didn't exist, misunderstanding body language could be fatal. Eve noticed. Of course she did. You're calculating, she said softly. That's good. Humans who calculate survive longer. She shifted again, finally sitting upright. The bed dipped slightly with her movement, subtle but undeniable proof that this wasn't a projection or a dream. The room adjusted its lighting automatically, brightening just enough to keep both of them clearly visible without feeling clinical. Elias exhaled slowly. You said I collapsed. Yes. From what? Eve's gaze flicked, just once to the side of the room. A transparent panel activated, projecting a slow-motion replay of a corridor feed. Elias saw himself walking, datapad in hand, brows furrowed. Then the moment his stride faltered. His pupils dilated unnaturally. His hand reached out, not for a weapon or support, but toward empty air, as if trying to grab a thought before it vanished. Then he dropped. That, Eve said calmly, was the moment your brain attempted to reconcile two incompatible truths. Elias watched the replay in silence. You ran a pattern recognition algorithm on our diplomatic interaction archives, she continued. You weren't looking for deception. You were looking for inefficiency, emotional inconsistency, behavioral lag. His jaw tightened. I was optimizing predictive models. And you found us, she said. Not lying, not malfunctioning, performing. The word landed heavily. You're not suppressing emotions, Elias said slowly. You're curating them. Eve's eyes returned to him. There was no pride there, no shame either. Yes. The projection faded. Most species evolve emotional regulation naturally, she said. Yours included. Social conditioning, hormonal feedback, cultural reinforcement. But evolution has limits. There are thresholds beyond which regulation becomes unstable. So you engineered past those limits, Elias said. We refined them. She stood now. Elias' eyes followed her movement despite his best efforts. She was taller than he'd realized, her presence commanding the room without effort. The black garment she wore fit her like it had been designed with intimate knowledge of her body, not to display it, but to contain it, to keep something restrained. You call us aliens, Eve said, walking slowly toward the far wall. But the truth is simpler. We are what happens when a civilization decides emotional unpredictability is an existential risk. A panel slid open at her gesture, revealing a faintly glowing interface. Lines of alien script scrolled beside symbols Elias' translator struggled to interpret. We learned long ago, she continued, that passion destabilizes governance, that grief weakens strategic clarity, that love compromises command decisions. Elias frowned. And you eliminated them. Eve turned back to him. No, she said quietly, we hid them. The way she said it, precise, deliberate, sent an unexpected chill down his spine. You didn't just notice our behavioral masks, she went on. You noticed the strain, the micro-delays, the moments where something authentic almost surfaced and was pulled back. Elias' throat felt dry. That's what caused the overload. Yes, your mind tried to model what happens when suppressed emotional bandwidth exceeds containment thresholds. And your neural architecture attempted empathy, Eve said. with something that has learned to survive without expressing itself. She returned to the bed, stopping just short of where he sat. Humans are not built to witness that contradiction, she added. You felt it, not logically, somatically. Elias nodded slowly. He remembered the sensation now, the pressure behind his eyes, the sudden weight in his chest that had nothing to do with oxygen deprivation. So why bring me here? He asked. If I'm a risk, you could have wiped the data or me. Eve looked down at him. For the first time since he'd woken, something unmistakably human crossed her face. Hesitation. Because, she said, you didn't reduce us to a threat. She leaned closer, not invading his space, but close enough that he could see the subtle details in her eyes. Not just blue, layered, faceted, like light trapped in crystal. You didn't ask how to exploit the gap, she continued. You asked what it was doing to us. Elias felt something twist in his chest. That concern, Eve said almost to herself, is rare. Silence stretched between them. Then Elias asked the question he'd been holding back since waking. What happens now? Eve straightened. Now, she said, you learn the truth behind the mask you uncovered. Her gaze sharpened, regaining its command edge. And I determine whether you are capable of seeing what lies beneath it, without breaking. She reached out, not touching him but stopping just short, fingers hovering in the air between them. Because if you can, she said quietly, you may become something no human has ever been to us before. Elias held her gaze, pulse steady despite everything screaming at him that this was dangerous. And what's that? He asked. Eve's lips curved, not in a smile this time but in something far more restrained. A witness, she said. The lights dimmed again, and somewhere deep inside Elias he realized this was no longer about analysis or protocols or even survival. It was about what happens when a civilization that has hidden its true self for centuries is finally seen, and what it demands in return. Elias didn't realize he was holding his breath until Eve lowered her hand. The space between her fingers and his chest, no more than a few centimeters, felt charged, like static waiting for contact. When she withdrew, the absence was almost louder than her presence had been. A witness, Elias repeated quietly. Eve turned away from him, moving toward the far side of the room where the walls curved into shadow. The lighting followed her in subtle gradients, as if the environment itself prioritized her comfort over his orientation. Yes, she said, not an ally, not a subject, not a liability. She paused. A witness is more dangerous than all three. Elias stood slowly. Not abruptly, he was learning, but with deliberate care. The bed released him without resistance, another small reminder that nothing here was designed to restrain him. That somehow made the situation more unsettling. You keep saying that like it's a role, he said, like something you assign. Eve glanced back at him over her shoulder. It is, she replied, and it is. She gestured and the room changed. The smooth walls dissolved into layered projections, architectural schematics, neurological scans, fragments of recorded interactions between her species and humanity, diplomatic meetings, cultural exchanges, carefully moderated smiles, perfect posture, voices calibrated to reassure performance. You see what we show, Eve said, what we allow you to see. The projections shifted. Now Elias saw the same scenes but slowed, microexpressions highlighted, heart rate anomalies, neural spikes buried beneath flattened emotional outputs, strain. You saw this, she continued, not consciously. Your mind felt it before it understood it. Elias stepped closer to the projections, his analyst instincts engaging despite himself. You're running emotional load at unsustainable levels. Yes, why hasn't it collapsed? Eve's reflection appeared faintly in the projection's surface, standing behind him now. Because collapse is managed. He turned, meaning. Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. Meaning we bleed, she said, just not where anyone can see. The words hit harder than Elias expected. You said emotions were hidden, he said, curated, but this isn't just hiding, this is containment. Eve nodded once. Containment, she agreed. Because emotion is not just expression. It is impulse, and impulse reshapes history. She raised her hand again, this time activating a different projection. Not data, a memory. Elias felt it before he understood it, a sudden, subtle pressure in his chest. The room dimmed further, the projections narrowing into a single scene. An alien chamber, vast, circular, filled with beings like Eve, tall, composed, identical in their restraint. At the center, one of them knelt. She was trembling. Not violently, not visibly, but the emotional distortion was unmistakable. Fear leaked through the room like radiation. Others turned away, not in disgust, but in practiced avoidance. She loved, Eve said softly, her voice no longer quite as controlled. Publicly, once. The kneeling figure reached out toward another. The contact was brief. The reaction was immediate. The room fractured into alarm. Neural dampeners activated. The kneeling figure collapsed, not dead, but emptied. Her emotional signature flattened into silence. Elias felt his stomach turn. "You erased her," he said. Eve's jaw tightened. "We stabilized her," she corrected. "She survived, she still lives. But what she felt, what she was, could not be permitted to spread." The projection faded. Silence fell again, heavier than before. "That," Eve said, "is why emotion is regulated, why vulnerability is forbidden, why witnessing matters." Elias rubbed his hands together slowly, grounding himself. "So why show me this?" Eve didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer. Close enough now that Elias could feel the subtle warmth of her body, could see the faint irregularity in her breathing, something no projection would ever show. "Because," she said quietly, "you already sensed it." Her eyes searched his face, not clinically this time, but with something like uncertainty. "You didn't just analyze us," she continued. "You felt the cost." Elias swallowed. "That doesn't make me special, it makes me human." Her lips parted slightly. "That," she said almost reverently, "may be the same thing." For a moment neither of them moved. Then something shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But Elias felt it like a hairline crack through reinforced glass. Eve's gaze flickered, just for a fraction of a second. Her control wavered, not enough for alarms, not enough for systems to react, but enough for him to see it. Loneliness. Sharp, sudden, unfiltered. Elias inhaled sharply before he could stop himself. Eve froze. The room responded instantly, lights brightening a fraction, systems recalibrating. She straightened, composure snapping back into place with frightening speed. But it was too late, they both knew it. "You felt that," she said, not a question. "Yes," Elias replied softly, "and you felt me feeling it." Another pause. "This one was dangerous." "You are not supposed to be able to do that," Eve said, and for the first time there was something like fear beneath her control. "I didn't try," Elias said. "It just happened." She took a step back, creating space where none had existed moments before. "This," she said carefully, "is why witnesses are dangerous." Her eyes locked onto his. "And why," she added, voice barely above a whisper, "they cannot be allowed to walk away unchanged." The systems in the room settled, but the crack remained, invisible, unrepairable. And Elias understood, with a clarity that made his chest ache, that he hadn't just seen behind the mask. He'd touched what was underneath. The room felt different now. Not visibly, not in any way the station's sensors would record, but Elias could feel it in his chest, a low tension that hadn't been there before, like a held breath that refused to release. Eve stood several steps away from him, her posture flawless again, too flawless, the kind of control that didn't reassure but warned. "You should not have felt that," she said. "I know," Elias replied. The honesty came easily. There was no point pretending otherwise. "I didn't reach for it," he added. "It wasn't analysis. It wasn't intention. It just crossed the space between us." Eve's fingers curled slowly at her side. "That crossing," she said, "is precisely what our systems are designed to prevent." She turned her head slightly, not looking at him directly now. The lights dimmed another fraction, responding to a biometric change she hadn't fully suppressed in time. You need to understand something, Elias Carter, she continued. What you sensed was not meant for any external nervous system. It was not encoded, not translated, not filtered. It was raw. Loneliness. The word echoed in his mind without her having to say it. And you didn't recoil, Eve said. You didn't shield yourself. You didn't collapse. She finally looked at him again. You stayed. Elias took a slow step forward, careful to stop well before she might interpret it as intrusion. I didn't want to hurt you, he said quietly. Whatever that was, it didn't feel dangerous. It felt forbidden, Eve finished. Yes, Elias admitted, but not wrong. That did it. For the first time since he'd woken, Eve's composure fractured visibly, not completely, but enough that it was undeniable. Her breathing stuttered, just once. Her eyes darkened, the crystalline blue deepening into something almost painful to look at. No human has ever said that to me, she said. Not accusation, not pride, fact. She turned away from him abruptly, walking toward the far wall as if distance itself were a form of regulation. You are standing in a space that exists only because my people believe no one can truly see us, she continued, her voice controlled again but tighter now. Our systems do not account for what happens when someone does. Elias followed her with his gaze but didn't move. So what happens now? He asked. Eve stopped. The room was very still. There are protocols, she said. Automatic responses, memory edits, neural dampening. We can sever the resonance you triggered. Resonance, the word made his chest tighten. And if you do, Elias asked. Eve was silent for a long moment. Then what you felt, she said carefully, will fade for you. And for you. She didn't answer immediately. When an emotion is interrupted mid-formation, she said instead, it does not disappear, it folds inward. Elias frowned. That doesn't sound healthy. It is efficient, Eve replied. He let out a slow breath. You showed me what happens when efficiency replaces humanity. Her shoulders tensed at the word. Humanity, she repeated softly. You assume we want it. I don't, Elias said, but I think some part of you misses it. Eve turned back to him. Her gaze was sharp now, dangerous. You are projecting, she said. Your species romanticizes emotional exposure. You believe vulnerability is inherently virtuous. No, Elias said, I believe connection is. The word landed between them like a live wire. Eve stared at him, searching, testing for fear, for desire, for manipulation. Finding none, only concern, only presence. This is the moment, she said quietly, where I am required to decide whether you remain an observer or become involved. Involved how? Elias asked. She stepped closer again, slowly. Deliberately, close enough that he could feel her this time. Not heat, not touch, but something deeper. A faint, undeniable pull, like standing too close to a gravitational anomaly. If I allow this resonance to continue, Eve said, you will begin to sense more, not thoughts, not memories, emotional states, pressure, absence, want. His pulse quickened, but he didn't step back. And you, he asked, her voice dropped. I will no longer be able to pretend you do not see me. They stood there, the distance between them charged with unspoken consequences. Elias made his choice. Then don't pretend, he said. Not with me. Eve closed her eyes. Just for a second. When she opened them again, something fundamental had shifted. All right, she said. The word was barely audible. I will loosen control, Eve continued. Not fully, not enough to endanger either of us, but enough that what you felt does not fracture into something worse. Her gaze locked onto his. You will feel things you were never meant to, she warned. And once you do, you cannot unfeel them. Elias nodded. I'm already past that point. A pause, then Eve reached out. This time her fingers didn't stop short. They brushed his wrist. The contact was light, controlled, but the effect was immediate. Elias gasped, not in pain but in sheer sensory overload. Emotion surged through him, not as images or thoughts but as pure sensation. Isolation. Endurance. A quiet, aching desire to be seen without consequence. He staggered slightly and Eve steadied him without thinking, her hand tightening just enough to anchor him. Their eyes met. Her control wavered again, but this time she didn't pull it back. "This," Eve whispered, "is why we forbid witnesses." The lights dimmed completely, and in the darkness, Elias understood that whatever he had just agreed to, there was no version of his life where he walked away unchanged. The interruption came as a tremor in the air. Not a sound at first, just a subtle shift, like the room itself tightening. Eve felt it before Elias did. Her head snapped up, eyes unfocusing for a fraction of a second as she interfaced with systems he couldn't see. "Someone is accessing this sector," she said. Elias steadied himself, the aftershock of what he just felt still humming through his nervous system. Her touch had withdrawn, but the resonance hadn't faded. It lingered soft, aching, unmistakably real. "Security?" he asked. "Diplomatic oversight," Eve replied. "Higher than station command." That was worse. The lights brightened abruptly. The room reconfigured, surfaces smoothing, projections dissolving, anything that might suggest intimacy vanishing into pristine neutrality. Eve stepped back, every trace of vulnerability sealing itself behind layers of perfect composure. Too perfect. Elias could feel the difference now. The contrast between what she was and what she presented scraped against him like static. A chime echoed through the room. "Commander Eve," a voice said from nowhere and everywhere. Calm, controlled. Alien in ways Elias' translator struggled with. "You are requested to confirm the status of the human asset in your quarters." Asset? Elias clenched his jaw. Eve's reply was immediate, flawless. "The human is conscious and stable. I am conducting a controlled evaluation following a neural anomaly triggered by unsanctioned pattern recognition." A pause. "Your authorization." "Black tier," Eve said evenly. "Personal discretion invoked." Another pause, longer this time. Elias felt it again, pressure, scrutiny, the sense of being looked through rather than at. "Your discretion has limits," the voice replied. "The human's exposure to internal variance exceeds acceptable thresholds." Eve didn't look at Elias, but he felt her awareness of him sharpen. "I am aware," she said, "and I am managing it." Silence stretched. Then, "You are deviating from optimal containment." A microsecond, barely measurable. Eve's fingers twitched. "I am preventing a rupture," she said. "Efficiency is not the only metric." That did it. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Your statement has been logged," the voice said at last. "Observation will continue." You are reminded that emotional resonance is not a justification for procedural deviation. The connection severed. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with what hadn't been said. Eve exhaled slowly. When she finally turned to Elias, the control was back, but thinner now, strained. "You should not have heard that," she said. "I should have been memory edited an hour ago," Elias replied. "Yet here we are." Her lips curved faintly, not a smile. Something sharper. "Yes," she said, "here we are." She crossed the room and stopped in front of him, close enough that the space between them felt deliberate again. "They are watching now," Eve continued quietly. "Not closely enough to intervene immediately, but enough that mistakes will not go unnoticed." Elias met her gaze. "Then why are you still here with me?" Eve's eyes softened, just a fraction. "Because," she said, "severing what we started would cause more damage than allowing it to stabilize." "And what does stabilization look like?" Elias asked. Her voice dropped. "It means I cannot pretend you are merely a variable," she said, "and you cannot pretend you are unaffected." He felt that in his bones. "You felt what I allowed," Eve continued, "and I felt you holding it without trying to shape it, without fear, without hunger." She hesitated. "That is rare." Elias lifted his hand slowly, deliberately, giving her time to stop him. She didn't. His fingers brushed the back of her hand. This time the resonance was gentler, quieter, still intense, but steadier, like a current rather than a surge. Eve's breath caught, just once. If anyone had been watching closely enough, that would have been enough. "I don't want to be your asset," Elias said softly, "and I don't want you to be my mystery." Her eyes locked onto his. "What do you want, Elias Carter?" she asked. The question wasn't strategic, it was personal. "I want you to be able to choose," he said, "not because systems allow it, not because efficiency demands it, but because you want to." The silence that followed was different, not tense. Fragile. Eve closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the mask was still there, but something underneath had shifted permanently. "Then listen carefully," she said, "because this is the only time I will say it this way." She leaned closer, her forehead nearly touching his. "What we are doing cannot be named," Eve whispered. "Not yet, not safely. If it is framed as attachment, it will be terminated. If it is framed as compromise, it will be corrected." Her hand tightened around his. "But if it is framed as stability," she continued, "as a unique resonance that reduces long-term system strain, then it may be permitted to exist." Elias understood. Not love, not alliance, something quieter, deeper, a shared equilibrium. "I can do that," he said. "I can be that." Eve studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "Good," she said, "because from this moment forward, you are no longer merely a witness." Her thumb brushed lightly against his skin. "You are my variable." The word should have felt dehumanizing. Instead, it felt like an invitation. And somewhere beyond the walls of her quarters, systems recalibrated, unaware that the most dangerous instability they had ever encountered was no longer a flaw, but a choice. The recalibration began within the hour. Elias didn't see it at first. There were no alarms, no flashing indicators, no urgent footsteps outside Eve's quarters, just a subtle tightening in the air, like pressure changing before a storm. Eve noticed immediately. "They've adjusted my parameters," she said quietly. She stood near the viewport now, hands clasped behind her back in perfect diplomatic posture. From the outside, anyone observing would see nothing unusual. A high-ranking liaison calmly overseeing a human evaluation. Inside, Elias could feel the tension radiating off her like heat trapped beneath ice. "What kind of adjustment?" he asked. Eve didn't answer right away. Her eyes tracked something only she could see: internal readouts, predictive overlays, risk projections unfolding faster than any human system could follow. "They've narrowed the acceptable definition of stability," she said at last. "Before it allowed variance. Now it requires consistency." Elias frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Eve replied, turning to face him, "that whatever exists between us must now prove it reduces systemic strain. Not emotionally. Statistically." That didn't sound reassuring. "And if it does?" Elias asked. Her expression didn't change, but he felt it, a faint, involuntary spike of something sharp and cold. "Then this situation will be classified as destabilizing," she said, "and corrected." Corrected, the word carried the same weight as erased, severed, neutralized. Elias took a slow breath. "So they're running tests." "Yes, on me." A pause. "And on you." As if summoned by her words, the room shifted again. A low hum vibrated through the walls as an interface activated in midair between them. Streams of data scrolled past: biometrics, neural harmonics, emotional load graphs that made Elias' head ache just looking at them. Eve gestured, and the flow slowed enough for his implants to translate fragments. Resonance index, elevated. Containment integrity, within limits. Anomaly source, persistent external variable. "That's me," Elias said. "Yes," Eve replied. "You are now officially quantified." He let out a short, humorless breath. "Congratulations to both of us." For a moment, just a moment, something almost like amusement flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone. "They will expect a demonstration," she said. "Proof that your presence improves stability rather than undermines it." "And how exactly do we demonstrate that?" Elias asked. Eve stepped closer. This time there was no hesitation. "When I am near you," she said, "my internal suppression load decreases. Marginally, but measurably. The resonance you trigger distributes emotional pressure rather than allowing it to accumulate." Elias absorbed that. "So I'm acting like a buffer." "Yes." She met his gaze. "A stabilizer." The word landed differently than variable had. "And what does it cost you?" Elias asked quietly. Eve's jaw tightened. There is always a cost, she said. The question is whether it is greater than the cost of suppression. She reached out again, taking his hand, not lightly this time, but with deliberate intent. The contact sent a familiar warmth through Elias' chest, steadier now, less overwhelming. He felt it immediately. Her emotional field, still restrained, still controlled, but no longer sealed. Not open, shared. Eve's breath slowed. Her shoulders relaxed by a fraction so small it would have been invisible to anyone else. The interface responded instantly. Suppression load, decreasing. Cognitive coherence, improved. Eve watched the data with focused intensity. "It's working," she murmured. Elias squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to carry it all alone." That was when the system flagged the anomaly. A sharp tone cut through the room. "Warning. Dependency trend detected." Eve went very still. Dependency. Elias felt it too, an instinctive tightening, a sense that they'd crossed an invisible line. "That's new," he said. "Yes," Eve replied softly, "and dangerous." The interface recalculated, projections branching into increasingly narrow paths. Most of them ended the same way. Separation. Stability achieved through exclusive resonance, Eve read aloud. Classified as unsustainable. She closed the interface with a sharp gesture, the projections vanishing into nothing. "They will conclude that I am becoming reliant on you," she said. "That my equilibrium is no longer self-contained." "And that's unacceptable," Elias said. "Yes." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't fragile. It was heavy with choice. Eve looked at him, really looked at him without the mask she showed the rest of the galaxy. Not unveiled, not exposed, but honest. "There is a way to deceive the models," she said quietly. Elias' pulse quickened. "Of course there is." Her lips curved faintly. "I can distribute the resonance." "Meaning?" "I allow them to believe the stabilization comes from process rather than person," Eve explained. "I frame you not as a unique anchor, but as a catalyst, something reproducible." "That sounds like you're making yourself more replaceable," Elias said. "Yes," she replied, "and you less essential." The words should have hurt. Instead, Elias felt something else, respect. "And what happens to us?" he asked. Eve stepped closer until there was no space left between them. Her voice dropped, meant only for him. "What happens to us," she said, "will exist outside the model." She lifted her free hand, resting it lightly against his chest, right over his heart. "They can measure stability," Eve whispered. "They can regulate emotion, but they cannot quantify choice." Elias covered her hand with his own. "Then choose me," he said. "Not as your variable, not as your stabilizer, just as someone who stays." For a long moment, Eve didn't move. Then she nodded once. "I already have," she said. The system, unaware of the decision just made, finalized its recalibration in the background. Stability projection, acceptable. Anomaly, reclassified. Elias didn't know what the reclassification meant yet, but he could feel it in Eve's grip, steady and real. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And somewhere deep in the station's unseen layers, a door had quietly closed, while another, far more dangerous one, had just begun to open. The station never slept. Elias had learned that during his first month on Echelon, how the hum of systems never truly faded, how there was always a background awareness of motion, data, and unseen oversight. But tonight, standing beside Eve as the recalibration finalized, that hum felt different, closer, listening. The interface dissolved completely, leaving the room quiet in a way that felt earned rather than imposed. Eve released his hand slowly, not because she wanted distance, but because she was recalibrating herself, internally this time. "They will accept the model," she said at last. "For now." "For now," Elias echoed. She turned toward the viewport again. Outside, the curve of the station glowed against the starfield, distant suns stretching into thin white lines as Echelon adjusted its orbital alignment. Beautiful, cold, indifferent. "They believe the resonance is procedural," Eve continued. "A byproduct of interaction rather than connection. That belief will protect us from immediate intervention. Us, the word settled warmly in Elias' chest. And later, he asked. Eve didn't answer immediately. Instead, she did something unexpected. She sat down, not with perfect alignment, not with diplomatic precision. She lowered herself onto the edge of the bed she'd shared with him earlier, shoulders relaxing in a way that would have horrified any external observer trained in her species' standards of composure. It will become more difficult, she said quietly. The longer this continues, the harder it will be to maintain the fiction that nothing personal is occurring. Elias moved closer, stopping just short of touching her again. You're allowed to stop, he said, at any point if this becomes too much. I know, Eve interrupted gently. She looked up at him then, and for a moment, he saw something dangerously close to what he'd witnessed before. Not unveiling, not collapse, but a thinning of the veil that separated who she was from who she performed. But I don't want to stop, she said. The admission hung in the air between them. For most of my existence, Eve continued, I have understood myself as a function, a stabilizing force, an interface between volatility and order. My worth has always been defined by how well I contained what others could not. She placed one hand flat against her own chest, as if grounding herself. When you are near me, she said, that containment is no longer solitary. The pressure redistributes, not because you remove it, but because you acknowledge it. Elias felt a familiar ache behind his ribs. You don't have to earn your right to feel, he said softly. Eve's lips curved, not quite into a smile, but into something close. That belief, she replied, is profoundly disruptive. He huffed quietly. Yeah, I get that a lot. For a few seconds they simply sat there, two figures framed by alien light and distant stars, sharing a silence that no longer felt dangerous. Then Eve's posture shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, but Elias noticed. They're observing again, she said, closer this time. Yes, she stood, the diplomat returning in layers, control sliding back into place like armor, but it wasn't perfect anymore. Elias could feel the difference now. The mask fit differently. I will need to distance myself publicly, Eve continued. Fewer unscheduled interactions, reduced visibility of our proximity. He nodded. I figured. Her gaze softened. That does not mean separation, she added. It means discretion. She stepped closer again, lowering her voice. There is a sector of the station, Eve said, unmonitored by central diplomatic oversight, legacy architecture. Human-built, retrofitted before my people joined the station. Elias raised an eyebrow. Maintenance corridors. Yes, he smiled faintly, of course. I will not come to you, Eve continued. That would draw attention. But there are moments, brief windows, where coincidence can be justified. She hesitated. You would need to choose them, she said, knowing that proximity will always increase scrutiny. Elias didn't hesitate. I'll choose them, he said. Eve studied his face carefully, searching for doubt, finding none. Then this is where we diverge, she said quietly, for appearances. She stepped back, restoring just enough distance that the room no longer read as intimate. But not in truth. She turned toward the door, then paused. Elias, she said. Yes. For what it's worth, Eve added, her voice softer than it had been all evening. What you offer is not chaos. She met his eyes one last time. It is balance. The door slid open soundlessly. She left without looking back, composed, untouchable, exactly what the station expected her to be. Elias remained where he was for a long moment after the door closed. His heart was steady. His fear was quiet. And beneath it all, something else had taken root. Not certainty, not safety, but choice. Somewhere deep within Echelon Station, systems adjusted to a new normal, one they believed they fully understood. They didn't. And neither Elias nor Eve yet knew what price would be demanded when balance stopped being theoretical and became personal. The maintenance corridors smelled like dust, metal, and old decisions. Elias liked them for that reason. They were honest places, spaces built to function, not to impress. No diplomatic lighting, No adaptive aesthetics. Just exposed conduits, worn floor panels, and the quiet understanding that no one came here unless they had a reason. Tonight, he had one. He leaned against a bulkhead near junction C-17, pretending to review a diagnostic readout on his wrist pad. To anyone monitoring station traffic, he was exactly what he appeared to be, a human technician checking legacy systems that no one else wanted to deal with. Coincidence, as Eve would have called it. He felt her before he saw her. Not the resonance, not fully. That was quieter now, disciplined by necessity. This was subtler, a shift in the air, a presence that aligned with him rather than pressing against him. Footsteps approached, measured, controlled. Eve stepped into the corridor as if she belonged there, which officially she did not. Her attire was different from their first meeting, still formal but less ceremonial, functional. A version of herself designed to pass without comment if seen from a distance. Her eyes met his. Nothing else needed to be said. They stood there for a moment, the hum of the station filling the silence between them. This wasn't secrecy born of shame. It was caution born of choice. "You shouldn't stay long," Eve said quietly. "I know," Elias replied. He didn't move closer, neither did she. But the space between them felt intentional now, not a barrier but a held note. "I wanted to confirm something," Eve continued. "The recalibration held. My internal metrics remain within acceptable thresholds." "That's good," Elias said. "Yes," she agreed, "it is." She hesitated, and he prompted gently. Her gaze softened just a fraction. "And the quiet," she said, "is different." He understood immediately. "Less empty?" he asked. "Yes," Eve said, "less empty." That was enough. They didn't need to touch. Not here, not now. The station was listening more closely than before, even if it didn't know what it was listening for. "I'm glad," Elias said, "for what it's worth." Eve studied him for a moment, then inclined her head slightly. Not a diplomatic gesture, a personal one. "This arrangement," she said, "will not be easy. There will be moments where distance is required, where silence is necessary." "I can handle silence," Elias replied, "as long as it's chosen." Her lips curved faintly. "You continue to say destabilizing things," she noted. He smiled. "You continue to survive them." A soft chime echoed somewhere down the corridor, an alert neither of them had triggered. Eve's posture shifted instantly. "That's my signal," she said. "Already?" Elias asked. "For now," she replied. She turned to leave, then paused. "Elias." "Yeah, there may come a time," Eve said carefully, "when the system demands a decision I cannot delay, one that will redefine how I am categorized." He didn't ask what that meant. "I'll be here," he said instead, "whatever that decision is." She looked at him then, not as a commander, not as a liaison, but as herself. "That," she said softly, "is what I was never trained to account for." She left the corridor without another word, her footsteps fading into the station's endless rhythm. Elias remained where he was, heart steady, mind clear. The crisis had passed. The connection had stabilized. Nothing was broken. And yet, somewhere in the unseen layers of Echelon Station, long-range systems recalculated future probabilities. One of them, newly flagged and poorly understood, carried a note no algorithm could fully parse. Emergent variable, sustained mutual choice. It wasn't an alarm, it wasn't a threat, just a quiet acknowledgement. That something had begun, not explosively, not recklessly, but deliberately. And that when the moment came to choose between efficiency and something far more human, someone would have to decide what was worth preserving.